Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Multispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call. 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. Or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Evans. Welcome in, man.
Wow, it is cold. It hit like minus 40 over the weekend here.
Yeah, it's just a testament to our survival. That's the way I look at that. 1-855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. The email live@asknoahshow.com. You're on the air. Good evening. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Oh, wow, that was quick. All right, cool. Hey, this is George from New York, Brooklyn. How y'all doing?
Welcome in, George.
Just a quick question. Yeah, so in my church, they're trying to get office computers, and I had the crazy idea, instead of getting crappy new computers from like Best Buy or whatever, I figured you guys had an idea of good business class used computers that I could get for them instead.
Ooh, I like this. I like where you're going, George. Steve, you showed up with some used computers for your kids. Can you talk about how you arrived at that, what you were looking to get out of them, and how it worked out?
So I was primarily looking for laptops, but in general, I tend to favor Lenovo stuff. The quality has been consistently good. They are business class machines, and ultimately, if you are a savvy shopper, that means that you'll be able to find them in good condition because they're prolific enough that they're relatively cheap. They have an availability of parts, and honestly, I've never had a terrible experience with buying those used.
Yeah, they're built like tanks. So if you were to translate that, George, into like a desktop version, you might look at like the Lenovo Think Centers. If you wanted to branch out to a different brand, Dell is not a bad way to go. So the Optiplex is going to be a really good business class computer. I think I can share this on the air. There was a nonprofit that approached us. And we went out to the nonprofit and they asked us, they said, hey, we can't open our store sometimes until 10 o'clock in the morning. So I asked, well, why not? Well, sometimes the computers don't work until 10. What time do you want to open? 8 in the morning. How do the computers not work for 2 hours? Well, you just turn them on and then sometimes they don't work and you got to restart them. And so we're going back and forth and back and forth. So why didn't you buy new computers? And the answer was, well, we don't have any money for new computers. And we keep getting bids to replace them all, but we've got like 8 machines and it would cost like thousands and thousands of dollars that we don't have. So we just put up with it. And so I said, well, it sounds to me like you'd be real well served if we went and ordered a couple of Optiplexes off of eBay for $150. If they just turned on and booted, you'd be in a better boat. Am I right? And they said, yeah, absolutely. And that's what we did. And we got to the end of that project and she came out to me and she's like, I had 3 bids from 3 different IT companies. You're the only person that even brought up used hardware as an option. So if you're trying to do that for your church, George, I think you're absolutely on the right track.
All right, sweet. Thanks for your answers, guys.
So, I would start with eBay. I'd take a look and see if there's an Optiplex that's available. I tend to look for things that are made within the last 4 years, George. And right now, if they're going to put Windows on it, I'd make sure to buy something that has a TPM chip in it so that it's compatible with Windows 11. The thing that would maybe not reflect well is if we said, hey, let's buy these used computers, you buy them, they hit October of next year. And to be fair, I do think they kick that deadline down, but you hit October of next year and they're like, oh, sorry, you can't use Windows anymore. They can't update. That would not be a good look.
No, and I totally forgot about that. And yeah, you're right.
So, Optiplex or a Lenovo Think Center if you want to stick in the Lenovo camp. And let me know how it works out, would you?
All right, will do. I'll let you guys keep you updated.
Awesome. Thanks, George. 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. We'd love for you to join the program, ask your questions. So, Steve, I got a new toy this week. Maybe Steve's button wasn't on there. I know you're there now.
I am here now.
So, are you familiar with the Flipper Zero?
You know what? It's been a while, but why don't you tell us all about it?
The best way I can think to describe the Flipper Zero is an electronic multi-tool. And so it's useful for a couple of different reasons. The first, at its most basic, it has receivers, radio receivers. It has radio transmitters. It has a little IR transmitter receiver. It has an SD slot. It has a little LCD. It has a little, directional pad, and it's got GPIO on it. And the idea is they're a little over $100, and you can learn, explore, teach, and experiment with technology. Let me give you an example. So the thing that brought it to the forefront of my attention, and I can't really get into the background of the situation that led to this, but the short version was, Steve, I found myself having to bypass some access control. Let's just say that I found myself. And so, let's just say that with a can of compressed air turned upside down to trip motion detectors and a small little 12-volt battery to trip strikes, you can pretty much get around any sort of access control system, whether it's being locked by magnets or strikes. That's really all I want to say on that. But back to the Flipper Zero. I sought to find an easier way to accomplish my task. And rather than turning a can of compressed air upside down and tripping the motion detector and or trying to cut into a wall to get access to some 12-volt, I wanted an ability to say, we have a working credential. Let me just grab that and use that. And so what the Flipper Zero allows me to do is when you turn the Flipper Zero on, it boots up and has a bunch of different, I guess, menu settings. So there's sub-gigahertz, there's 125 kilohertz, there's NFC, infrared, GPIO, I button. You can emulate a bad USB. You can mimic U2F, those sorts of things. And so if you go into, for example, the 125 kilohertz credential, there you can read credentials and you can hold a key up to it and it will read it. You can then emulate that key back out, or you can save that key to the Flipper Zero and recall it at any time. The other thing is it allows you to read and emulate NFC, which is of note because phones have the chip. This is one of the things that really rubs me raw. Cell phones have a chip that will let you do NFC, but they intentionally nerf the header of the NFC chip so that you can't use it to emulate things like credit cards or hotel keys. And that's why you can't scan a hotel key and read it back, even though your phone technically has the hardware to do so. Well, the Flipper Zero allows you to do just that. And then on top of that, they have a number of different apps that you can get to do more things. And so you can go into RFID or NFC and use a bunch of different apps that will let you do things like iClass keys for HID and so on and so forth. So it's a really, really cool little device. I was blown away by both the quality of it and the functionality. 1-855-450-NOAH, 855-450-6624. You're on Ask Noah. Good evening. Hello? Going once? Going twice? Thanks for the call. All right, 855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. The email live at asknoahshow.com. Would love to have you join the program. You could ask Steve or I your questions. We're very flexible with how we take them. So you can join us in the chat room at geeklab:/LinuxDelta.com. Steve, should we get into some feedback?
Let's do it.
Our first email comes in from Ziggy. Ziggy writes in and says, "Hi guys, thanks for the helpful and informative response to my question on potential HVAC control in episode 397. In regards to wondering about the pumping of water and the thermostat piece, the boiler, kerosene, has a built-in thermostat where it's connected to the tank. The houses is heated water. This is also the thermostat. Then there are thermostats all over the radiators. I think I understood what you have suggested. I'm going to employ a cousin who happens to be an electrician to be sure I'm not going to blow us all up." A follow-up query. Which method of timer control would you recommend? I mentioned Zigbee in my first email. I already have a Zigbee bridge, and therefore I knew it could be easy to import. From this point, I don't know how I would set up a timer on Zigbee. So if you have any suggestions here, that would be great. Otherwise, if you have any methods you think that would work, like Tasmoda, hope all that is clear and not confusing. Best regards, Ziggy. So, Steve, if you were going to set up some sort of a timer system, how would you do that with Zigbee?
I guess I wouldn't do it on Zigbee itself, provided that I wasn't using something like Shelly, because we've talked about in the past how Shelly has like built-in automations and like its own scripting language, and they now support all of the protocols if you like to. But not failing that, honestly, I would use some sort of controller node if I had to. As far as I'm aware, there aren't any ESP devices that have Zigbee built into them, right? So the other option that you could think about is an ESP and kind of doing the programming there so that it all stays on the device. But I don't think they have Zigbee. So at the end of the day, you're left sending that signal somewhere and having an external thing monitor it, whether it's OpenHAB or Home Assistant, or even like you could send it to MQTT and capture it and have a script running somewhere. Really, personally, I would still send this back into Home Assistant, and I kind of already do this. I have a Bluetooth device that I essentially ping it every minute, and because I want to know if it's offline for a specific period of time. It's okay for it to drop 1 or 2 times, but as soon as it comes back on, I want to know that it's okay. So essentially, like, there's a counter, and I ping it, and over 55 minutes, I ping it once every minute. And if it responds with a changed number at all during that period, I consider that device to be alive. And so I already am doing something similar to this, and I'm using Node-RED inside of Home Assistant in order to track that.
If I'm reading kind of through, if I'm skimming kind of his email correctly, it sounds like the timer portion is now again, I'm kind of guessing here, but it sounds like the timer portion is the thermostat says, hey, I'm calling for heat. The thermostat or the timer, what? It starts the heating pump or the water pump to circulate the boiler water around for a predetermined amount of time, and then stops. I guess I'm a bit unclear. Why do we want to time this? What would be wrong with just having the thermostat call for the heat, and then when the thermostat is satisfied, it stops calling for the heat and the pump will shut off? I guess I'm not entirely sure why we need a timer.
So I can't speak to this, but I can tell you how I use this exact thing inside of technically outside in the chicken coop. Okay. So I've got this little pond heater, and this thing will heat your water to 80 degrees, which is too much. I don't need it that much. I just need the water not to freeze over so that the chickens can get at their water. Right? You don't want to be serving them tea in the middle of the wintertime. There's all kinds of bad that comes from that. You can't adjust the thermostat on most of the floating pumps that you like, floating heaters that you put in the water. Mm-hmm. And so I have a thermostat, I have a thermometer that's in the water and hooked up to a Shelly, and essentially it polls. It turns the heater on, and then it polls. And once it gets up to temperature that I want, I kill the power to the heater. So there is a case for things where you can't do it. Or I also have this with my thermostat. I don't know why, but I can't turn it below 70 degrees. It just will not let me. Like, if you click below 70, it hits 69 and then immediately bounces back up to 70. I have no idea why it does that. So
it might be some sort of a floor, right? Like, so I know like the commercial ones, they've got a floor, and then there's a special key command you have to do if you want to go outside of, this area.
And that could be. My workaround for that is a very similar thing to this, is that I basically just shut off the thermostat, and then I monitor the temperature in the house, and if it gets too cold, I bring the thermostat back online. But, when we're away for a couple of days or something, we don't need the house to be at 70 degrees if nobody's here.
Right.
So, but you don't want to shut it off when you've got minus 40 outside either. So there's a bunch of use cases I could think of, but yeah, Ziggy doesn't tell us exactly what our situation is.
Let us know how this progresses, Ziggy. We'd love to help you as you kind of step through this. Eric writes in with a battery pack question. Hi, Noah and Steve. Thanks for the call out on the show a couple of weeks ago. Exciting to hear about the project on your podcast. I have to read that part on the show. Oops. Anytime you want to reference our project, please do feel free to do so. A while back, you were talking about living on a battery pack to charge and power your devices, such as your laptop via a USB-C distribution. Are you still working off a battery? If so, how's that going? Did you take your own battery pack, or did you use something commercially available? What battery chemistry are you using? FYI, I stumbled into the world of Anderson Power Poles through my amateur radio, and all I can say is, where have these things been my whole life? So let's work backwards. Anderson Power Poles. These are God's gift to genderless connections. So they're plastic high amperage connectors. If you've ever driven a forklift, if you've ever worked on a Power Wheels, if you've ever, any of those things are likely being terminated with Anderson power poles. And so they've got a little red pole and a little black one, and it's like adult erector sets for adults. But the thing that's nice about them is the contacts will support high amperage. So I think the lowest they go down to is something like 15 amps, then 20 amps, 30 amps, 45 amps, and they'll go up to, and the big guys for like the forklifts and stuff, they get really high. And but the nice thing is they're genderless. And so the great thing about that is you put the Anderson power pole on the thing. So let's say it's the battery. Well, sometimes the battery needs to plug into a charger. Other times the battery is going to plug into a device. Why does that matter, Noah? Well, it matters because if it's plugging into a charger, typically the charger would have the male end, the battery would have the female end. But then you go to, I don't know, plug it into your laptop, and now the battery has the female end and you need the male. It's just all confusing and kittywomper. If they're all genderless, it doesn't matter. Anything can plug into any other thing. Am I using a commercial battery or am I using a made one? It's kind of a mix between the two. So the one that you're talking about in the episode is just a sealed lead acid battery from Deep Cycle Marine battery from a battery store. I use Interstate, but you could use any battery. That's a sealed lead acid, or that's Deep Cycle. The problem with it is they're inexpensive and there's a lot of watt hours, but they're really, really heavy. So my second thing that I fall into is this little device who was actually recommended to me by a listener of the program, Jeff. It's made by a company called Inu, I-N-I-U, and it is a small little battery pack that does 27,000 milliamps. Now, the important thing about 27,000 milliamps or 99 watt hours, that is the largest capacity the FAA will let you take onto a plane. So if you go with my big sealed battery, it's great for going around a church. It's fantastic for bumping around your house. It's great when you're out camping, not so great when you're flying on an airplane. And so for that, I like the Inu. And then for Christmas this year, my best friend bought me the DeWalt Type-C 100 watt inverter. And so basically it clips onto a DeWalt 20 volt battery pack and will produce 100 watts of Type-C current. And so an interesting thing that I've done with that little guy is I actually wired my couch up. Yes, I said my couch. I wired my couch up with Type-C to include a little female jack. And the back of the couch where it Velcros up, I mounted a little thing so I can clip the DeWalt battery pack in there. And the idea is if there's people are over, I will clip that little battery pack, and then when people are sitting on the couch, inevitably somebody go, can I charge my phone? And instead of going, just walk out in the kitchen, walk over there, reach down to your right, grab the Type-C cord and plug it in. But it's fruity. Well, use an adapter. But either way, I've got power built into the couch. And the nice thing is I don't have to run any wires, I don't have to do anything. It just all runs off of that little DeWalt pack. So you want to build it yourself? Go with the sealed battery. You're looking at $50-$60 for the battery. I'll put a link for the exact 12 volt adapter that I'm using. It's available on Amazon. The thing that I like about it is it took a little bit to try all of the cheap Chinese things to find out which ones actually work and which ones melt down and are not safe. And so I found the Chinese cheap Chinese 12 volt to Type-C PD that works really, really well. And that's what I've been using, and I've been really happy with it. So I'll post a link to that in the show notes. You can find those at podcast.asknoahshow.com. Steve, I think I know the answer to this, but you collect all of your power and put it in your battery banks at home. Outside of that, do you have much of a need for power on the go, or are you mostly I just take my AC power cord and plug it in?
You know what? I guess I have a laptop and a phone like everybody else when I go. But generally speaking, I make sure that my devices are charged when I leave the house. So not particularly. It's been something I've toyed with mostly for my wife, who would make far more use of it than I would.
If for the uninitiated, I highly recommend the Inu battery pack just from the standpoint it's super approachable. You charge it with the same Type-C charger that you ordinarily would instead of having to buy like a battery tender to trickle charge the sealed Deep Cycle, that sort of stuff. So I think it's a bit more approachable, but it just all depends on what you're going for. Now, Cubicle Nate in the chat room said he made a homemade DeWalt Type-C battery. So this is interesting. If you go to Amazon, and I've done it both ways. The actual DeWalt one I didn't do. I got it as a Christmas gift, but The thing that is of note is if you go to Amazon, you type in 12-volt DeWalt, you will get for $24, there is a step-down transformer that will convert 20-volt DeWalt batteries to 12-volt 30 amp, and it'll go up to 240 watts. I'll put this in the show notes as well. I'll throw it in the chat room as well. I want to see if maybe this is the one that Cubicle Nate is using. But the thing that I really like about doing it this way is it is significantly less expensive. The one made by DeWalt, I think, is $100 and some. Again, I want to be clear. It wasn't my money. It was a friend that bought it for me, so it just kind of showed up at my doorstep. But if I were doing it myself, I probably would actually buy the thing, just from the standpoint that I feel like it will be. I just think it's more modular. I think it just works better. I think but if you've got the cash, or if you're buying it for a friend or something like that, I can maybe see the wisdom in just plunking down the change and getting the actual purchase thing. But I'll post a link. So I have a link for the 20 volt to 12 volt adapter. Then I'll also post a link to the Type C outlet. So it's an 83 watt 12 volt USB outlet, and so it will do 83 watts of Type C. I've purchased these. It's actually kind of nice because they come in a 2-pack. And this is the exact one I built my little kit with, and then it works so well, I actually built another one that I take with me that is just like a little portable thing, and then that works so well that I built one into my couch. So all of those to say, we'll have links for you in the show notes. You can find those at podcast.asknoahshow.com. Our third email comes in from Brendan. Brendan says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. I'm wondering if you have opinions on using NFS versus S3, e.g. Minio, as a storage backend for a home lab. I'm looking to separate my Nextcloud app from its storage. The app will run in a VM on my SSDs, and the storage will live on spinning Rust." So, Steve, if you were Brendan, you woke up in his shoes and you were evaluating NFS versus S3, how would you go about doing that?
I look at recoverability first. So Nextcloud is critical to me, and so that I would be looking at recoverability. There's something to be said for a production instance of an S3 bucket, because there's a lot of ways that you can make S3 more resilient than perhaps you can do with NFS. However, when we're talking about in a home lab, I would be looking at the level of obscurity. Should I ever need to drop back for some reason to rescue those files from disk because the Nextcloud database gets corrupted or things of that nature, you're going to have a significantly harder time doing that from an S3 bucket than you are from NFS. On top of that, as far as I have looked into it, and now my data is a little bit old because I evaluated Minio a couple of years ago. But in general, S3 doesn't perform as well for a lot of small files. So it depends on what you're storing in your Nextcloud and what your goals are. I would lean away from S3. It's a level of complexity. So it's a software stack on top of something. So I use Minio, especially for things that require S3 style storage. Like there are some container registries and stuff like that I use it for. There's nothing, I'm not throwing shade at the project at all. It literally falls back to, these are critical files, and I can go to a file, I can go to the file system and recover those files. I have a significantly harder time doing that if Minio has a problem, right? If the S3 database somehow has a problem, and there have been cases of this in the past for other providers, you're kind of SOL, because it kind of scatters things all over the place and connects them via UID, and it's not particularly easy to traverse an S3 system that's broken. So for me, that's where I fall down. Okay.
Very, very interesting. So, so if you were doing it from, okay, all right. Is there anything that you like about S3 that you would say, hey, it depends on what your ultimate implementation is? So for example, if you said, hey, I know I'm always going to have control over the storage backend versus I know it's always going to be cloud, would that change it at all for you?
Well, like I said, S3 has its place, and I think that it functions very well at large deployments or things that you need to scale. It also has some level of ability to be redundant because you can just plug in additional storage nodes into S3 where you'd have a lot harder time doing that with NFS. I don't know how much data we're dealing with, but I've got 20 odd terabytes in my Nextcloud, and if I need to plug in, I'm not looking at grabbing another storage server and slamming that in there. I'm looking at expanding my Z pool. So, your mileage may vary. It really depends on the scale. Now, if you're interested in learning and you have a way that you want to back up your S3 bucket, because you can back up that, like you can go and pull those files out if you know what you're doing. There's no problem with it, right? I don't mean to cast shade. I'm looking at, hey, I really messed up something, or something went catastrophically wrong. How do I get this out? And my panic mode will be sated when I can just CD into a directory and go, all the files are there, right? Like that's ultimately where I am comfortable.
Okay. So, Brendan, hopefully that helps you. I would say, give it a shot. Do you think there's value in trying a couple of them in some? Okay, let me start. Let me back up a little bit. Everybody has a development environment. Some people are lucky enough to separate their development environment from their production environment. Is there value, with that in mind, of, hey, try it one way, try it the other way, see what works for you, see what you like, and then, then go on.
Sure. I mean, I'm always a proponent of use the technology in the way you want to. So in this case, they asked what our thoughts were, and that's what I think. But you want to play around with it. It's not like S3 is inherently bad. This is, Steve's paranoia.
The other thing that, determined, where is it? Here we go. 2-bit in the chat room says, you forgot RFID and NFC. So the Flipper Zero. So, and here's the thing, that's just with what it comes with out of the box. There are a whole bunch of things you can do with the Flipper Zero. There's apps that you can install to have it do a whole bunch of other stuff as well. And so, it's unbelievably powerful. In fact, the more I play with it, the more impressed I am. So, I would definitely, if you have an interest, I would say at a minimum, your minimum bar for entry is you have to care about technology. If all you want to do is read cards and say, hey, kids, wife, husband, whatever, here is how the transit pass works. Here's how that contactless payment works. Here's how the tag inside of your watch works. Whatever it is, if you want to be able to experiment, those. Hey, give me that IR remote. Let me show you how IR works. See how it has to be in sight of this thing. Oh, look at that Genie garage door opener. That's RF. Look, I can memorize that code that the Genie garage door is opening, and now I can emulate it. Those sorts of things. That would be the minimum bar for entry. And then, if you're like me and you work in tech and you. I mean, again, there's a limit to what I want to say on, in a recorded fashion, but there are times where you got to just do what you got to do to get the job done. And sometimes that means busting through stuff. And so it's a multi-tool that just makes it easier to get some of those things done. Our fourth email comes in from IK. IK writes in and says, in the last episode, Steve mentioned he tried Docker for Nextcloud in order to get the Calibra suite running for his wife. I'm wondering if he used the official all-in-one master container. I've used this for a couple of years now. It's been flawless, especially with the update process. A notorious problem with the Nextcloud in the past. Calibra is running on the stack by default, along with the recommended ancillary helpers such as Reddit and a turn server for talk. There's also community containers with additional functionality. The community containers folder in Git. I've used NC for almost as long as Steve, and no method I've used it under, I've tried everything multiple times, including a self-built Docker Compose stack, has come close to this method of running Nextcloud for stability, usability, and ease of management. Good luck, Steve. Enjoy the input to the show from a fellow Canuck. Steve, is he making fun of you for being Canadian?
Nope, that's just a nickname. It's like calling you a Yank.
All right. I'm like half Yank. I'm half Indian, half Yank. Others from India.
So just to answer this directly, the container that I was using was specifically related to Nextcloud Office. So I still was running Nextcloud bare metal on a bare metal install. I was augmenting it with various containers that were recommended in order to deploy Nextcloud Office, including Calibra. So I wasn't about to upend, the way that Nextcloud is architected here just to wedge in this one thing. So changing out for a container workload when I've had it deployed on bare metal was enough of a lift for something that was at best was just this would be nice to have. I've found myself a couple of times in the last couple of weeks thinking it would have been nice to open the spreadsheet in the web UI instead of having to download it and then open it. But at the end of the day, it just wasn't reliable enough.
I don't know how much we want to dig into this tonight, but can you talk a little bit about some of the things you've uncovered? I'll ask it this way. Is it safe to just, if something shows up as Docker, is it safe to assume that's from the manufacturer, from the original software author?
No, it's not. A lot of times there are well-known community members that will make a Docker container. So a very prominent member of the community is the Linux server IO people, and they make lots of Docker containers for lots of things that don't necessarily come packaged from the software developers themselves as a Docker container. So, or as a container in general. So no, you can't just assume that is the way. You may even have, so Image does this. Image has on their website, you go through the documentation. It has documents for various systems that they don't officially endorse, but they are community contributed guides for, I want to say like running on Unraid. I can't remember right off the top of my head, but they've got 2 or 3 very prominent, backends that you can run Image on that are not officially supported by the project, but you can still find guides on the project documentation website. So no, the answer is not all methods are blessed by the software developers, even if they're out there. Have
you come across a Nextcloud container that has nothing to do with the original Nextcloud people? And if so, how does that work?
It's been a while, but one of the ones that was the most popular that I saw was not the blessed way to do it at the time that I looked into it. So I don't know what has changed in that regard. We're talking about a couple of years ago. So, things change.
Right. And I think my understanding of what changed is Nextcloud came out with their own all-in-one container that, kind of tweaks everything and gets everything up and running. But I'll tell you, I think it was you we were having a conversation with, and I think we kind of concluded the not official one, again, not the official one, not the all-in-one container that seems to work flawlessly for people. The one that many people on the internet were flocking to, it was fine for testing. It was fine for small things, but when you really started to push it, there were configuration things that were just really not ideal for being used in production, I thought.
Yeah, I recall this as well. Like I said, it's been a little while since I dove into it, but I remember when I looked at it, I went and tracked it back to, okay, what does the official documentation say at how to install it? And then you look at the container that's out there, and it isn't the official container that says, like you go to the website and it says, oh, do this command here. Right now on their website, the Nextcloud does link to an all-in-one image on GitHub. So they do have one there, and that's probably the one that the author is referring to.
We'd be interested to hear about your Nextcloud experience, good or bad. If things worked really well, write in and tell us. If things worked terribly and didn't work at all, write in and tell us. We'd love to hear how things are working on Nextcloud for you, and if you're using the all-in-one package, how you're getting it set up and how it's working.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of January 19th, 2025, here's the Linux and open source news. The 25-year-old minimal browser Dilo has released version 3.2. OpenZFS 2.3 is out. rsync 3.4 is now available. In distro news, Linux Mint 22.1 has been released, and Rhino Linux 2025.1 is out. For the first time, TuxCare is offering support for Microsoft software that's no longer supported. .NET 6.0 reached end of life last November. TuxCare has announced that it's added Microsoft's .NET 6.0 to the roster of open source platforms it's now supporting through its endless lifecycle support program. Merit Systems is trying to solve a long-standing problem in tech: how to reward open source developers. The startup has raised a $10 million seed round co-led by Anderson Howard Crypto Fund and Blockchain Capital. And in open source AI news, Chinese AI startup Minimax has released new low-cost open source models.
So, Steve, you drew my attention to an ebook audiobook or a project for managing audiobooks. Tell me about it.
So actually, this is a project that is meant to take an ebook or just plain old text and convert it to an audiobook using like local AI. I really hate that kind of buzzword.
Me both.
But the idea is you toss a text file, or they support, I don't know, 25 different text type things. And essentially, after some time, it'll run on the GPU fairly well, and on a CPU probably pretty poorly. So I tossed just for fun, I tossed the Linux for Dummies, the 8-in-1 book that I bought for my son because we're gonna start. I've entered him into an apprenticeship, and he's going to become an apprentice Linux administrator, and I'm actually going to give him like a monthly salary. So I got him this book, and I got the PDF and I got the hard copy, and I thought, well, I'll just toss it at this to see how it goes. The PDF is 14.5 megs, and it took approximately 4 hours for my Quadro 6000 to chew through this and spit out an audiobook. But I was surprised at the quality, because there's lots of the local AI that you run for audio generation, and after, let's say, 30 seconds, it starts to lose its coherency and can get kind of gibberishy. But this thing, I skipped through a bunch of it, so I'd listen to several pages, and then I'd skip through and listen to several more just to see if I could find stuff. And despite the fact that the material itself is kind of dry to listen to in an audiobook, it's kind of amusing. It tickles me in a weird way to listen to Morgan Freeman read Linux to Dummies for me.
This is really cool, Steve. So there's two things now that you've attracted my attention. The first is, that's a really cool project. I agree with you. It's kind of cringeworthy that we're going to say that we're going to use terms like local AI, but I get what you're saying. The other thing that's of interest to me, to the extent that you're willing to share, talk to me about the apprenticeship you're doing with your kid.
Well, so part of it was lots of kids have a hard time wrapping their brains around doing something difficult. And it's not even wrapping their brains around it. It's more like things are challenging, and anything that's challenging should be avoided. You know, that's just kind of, humans have slid this way more and more. And my fear is that it's going to continue to do that. How can I encourage the actual development of a skill when I couldn't? So I tried to do programming with him. I tried to do electronics with him. And every time there was something, anytime there was any kind of remote, like mild resistance, he would just give up. So with programming, he didn't want to type. If he couldn't cut and paste the code, he was just not going to do it.
Okay. So we don't have motivation. We're not internally motivated to do the thing.
Exactly. So I sat down and I explained, you know, in the past, it used to be that fathers would pass down their occupation to their son as a way of giving them a skill. And apprenticeships wouldn't pay a ton, but they would give you some monetary value. So I set out like, you're going to have some tasks that I'm going to assign monthly, and at the end of the month, I'm going to check. And if you do the task, then there will be some monetary value associated with your apprenticeship.
Wow, Steve. That is so cool. That is so cool. So some parents are sitting there and going, yeah, little Johnny stood before me and converted oxygen into carbon dioxide and demanded $20. And so I opened my billfold up and handed him a 20. You're teaching your kids the value of work, that money comes from work, and you're going to impress upon your children the vast skill set that you've obtained over many decades of a career, and you're going to impart those skills on your kids so they can kind of hit the ground running. Should that be something they want to pursue? And even if they didn't, they're going to be very, very self-sufficient from a technical standpoint.
Well, that's kind of what the hope is. We'll see how it ends up turning out, right? Because who really knows? But at the end of the day, our job is to encourage creativity and learn what really motivates children, like your children, because your son is very motivated by like the shiny, right? And and what I've seen is he will continue to beat on something until he accomplishes it. My son he's used to having things become, he grasps things really quickly, and as soon as he doesn't, he gives up.
So he's used to so he's like my daughter. He wants to be good at everything, and if he's not good at everything, then it's the thing that's the problem.
Exactly. And so it's really hard for me to give him skills outside of the things he's intensely interested in. Right.
I think you have the right idea though, Steve. You've attached a carrot to the end of the stick, right? And so now maybe I am willing, maybe I'm not, but I want the carrot. And so maybe I don't really care about system administration, but gosh dang it, I really want the new toy, the treat, the whatever. And to do those things, I need moolah, cash, and dad's willing to pay me to do X, Y, Z, whatever. It's better than doing, better than mowing the lawn kind of a thing. I can just sit here in this air conditioned place and do this thing. I think the world of that. I think it's so cool.
It's it also coincides with the server upgrades that I was doing, because I decommissioned a couple of servers, and so now I have well, now you actually have a server, and you're not going to be able to SSH into this. You're like, he doesn't know anything about that yet. He hasn't read those chapters, but you're not going to be able to remotely connect to this. You're going to get no graphical interface and a keyboard and a monitor, and you'll have to do your tasks. But he's excited because it's a server that I'm like, you go ahead and tinker with this. Like, I don't care if you break the install. You're not going to break the hardware unless you physically take like a hammer to it. So, here's a server with 32 cores and 96 gigs of RAM. Go nuts.
Yeah, if we get to the hammer thing, then we'll comp T him first, and then then you can go in with the chainsaw and the hammer. I love it. Hey, Steve, I wanted to get your thoughts on AI for beginners. So you use the term local AI, and we but really, there are people out there that say to themselves, I've heard of AI. I'm watching news come out about AI. I'm hearing my friends talk about AI. I'm told AI might replace my job, might replace my friend's job, might take over the world. AI, everything's AI. What the heck is AI? What are the basics and key concepts? And Steve, you will probably remember this, but it was probably over a year ago. It wasn't a show thing. We were just chatting on the phone on a weekend or something like that, and we impromptu got into a conversation about AI because I think at the time you were doing some experimentation, and you went into a brief explanation, or a very high level explanation of the basic concepts of how AI works. So to the best I could, I tried to kind of recreate some of that, and I was hoping we could kind of step through. When people say AI, what really is AI? And I guess I'll start by saying it's maybe not all one thing. They classify it into different concepts or different focuses of AI. And so depending on what your task is or what thing you're trying to do, you will use AI differently. So I guess, can you start here? What's the difference between the math that we do on a CPU and a GPU, and why are GPUs so much better for doing AI workloads?
Whew, that's a loaded concept. I guess the very basic idea here, because I don't want to get too complicated, but essentially, so back in the day, we actually used to have what was called a math coprocessor, and computers would offload a bunch of their work to the math coprocessor. Now we're talking back in the 80s and before. And these were units that were designed specifically to handle a specific type of algorithm, the way that they handle it. CPUs are generalists. They have to be able to understand all kinds of levels of instruction. And because of that, they're also not optimized for specific types of workloads. Without getting too technical, the way that GPUs work in terms of handling algorithms and stuff like that has allowed them to be more efficient, on top of the fact that they have, RAM that's dedicated right on top of the chips themselves, which is hugely beneficial in terms of speed and handling the processing of data. Because when you're talking about language models, which is what we commonly think of when we think of AI, you end up having to have a lot of that run in RAM because pulling that off of the disk is just not tenable. It's not fast enough. Even if you've got NVMEs, you need direct access to that. So all that to say is GPUs are specialized in handling specific types of workloads, which line up with how we are currently tackling the processing of large amounts of data.
Is it accurate to say on a CPU you have very linear math? You're doing one very large problem. It starts at the beginning, goes to the end, that sort of thing. When you're doing graphical processing or AI models, essentially it's a bunch of little tiny math problems that all have to be done at the same time or as quickly as possible. And so you can scale horizontally by going to something like a GPU because it'll allow you, it's more suited for doing a bunch of those little math problems very quickly simultaneously.
So that's definitely a large part of it. Built into this, now we'll specifically talk about NVIDIA GPUs, but NVIDIA GPUs have what they refer to as CUDA cores. So they're essentially like mini CPUs, and they have literal thousands of them depending on the types of cards you have. And so, as you alluded to, when you break up into little chunks of data, it allows you to essentially multiplex all of the stuff. So you break this down into a whole bunch of tiny little steps, and then you toss that at 1,000 different CPUs. And even if the CPUs are technically slower than one giant one, that process will perform better. So on the GPUs, as they're splitting up the work to get handled by the CUDA cores, 1,000 CUDA cores are going to be significantly faster than 10 individual cores of like a CPU, just because of the amount that you can parallelize.
Okay. So NVIDIA has launched their new GB10 based Grace Blackwell super chip. It's called Project Digits, and the idea here is it delivers a petaflop of AI performance with a power efficient compact form factor. The selling point, the elevator pitch is you can buy a desktop AI thing that runs on your desk for like $3,000. Steve, what is a petaflop of AI of performance, and what does this $3,000 box get me?
Well, so let's start with what does it get you? Because I think that's more interesting than the technical definition of what a petaflop is. But essentially, right now, as it stands, the average developer that is working at a corporation that needs to kind of understand this sort of thing, their only real option for what they're doing is to work in the lab that their business has provided for them. You can hack around on your desktop at home, sure, but that's not really the same thing. And part of this is there are three different classes of video cards, broadly speaking. There's a desktop processor, there's the workstation processor, and then there's the processors that go inside of these big GPU farms. And they have different levels of functionality enabled or disabled depending on what they are. So Quadro, a workstation card, is going to be significantly better at some tasks than gaming cards. So your desktop card is focused at gaming and desktop graphics. It can do the other work, and it can do it significantly better than your CPU, but the Quadro is actually meant to do that, which means that it's less good at doing games. Like if you took a $6,000 Quadro card, it would do Blender and ML, like machine learning and AI stuff, significantly better than, your, I don't know, 5070 card that's just going to come out for $800. But it will perform significantly worse in games because they have a different focus in terms of the functionality that's there.
You know where that bit me, Steve? I wish we had this conversation 6-7 years ago, because I was working for a client. They were they're a home design store is what they are. They sell you stuff for your house, but as a part of that, they do design services. So you come in and say, "Oh, I just want my living room to look perfect. I want pink over here and white over here, and I want this and I want that, and I want these floors and I want those walls." And they put it all together in the computer, and then they let you walk through it. And, oh my gosh, it's so wonderful. Here's a really nice big check, right? That's the idea. So they wanted to buy these new computers, and every time we've bought computers for business that is doing high graphic needs, it's typically things like CAD, those sorts of things, and we've always gone with Precision series. And so we did what we do and bought Precision, thought they're doing graphic stuff, it'll work great, right? Wrong. We get the precision. We install the design software is called 2020. We get it installed. We get it running. Runs like dog crap. I mean, it's just terrible. And come to find out, you need to approach that software more like running a video game than running AutoCAD because, for the reasons that you just pointed out, it's not similar. It is so. Understanding that not all graphics cards are the same and why they function differently, you can spend a lot of money on the wrong thing and it won't do the job.
And so that is directly applicable to Project Digits, which is essentially like a blessed version of a box that Nvidia is putting out. So we often talk about trying to run your things in a production-like manner. And it's really difficult to do this with AI in any kind of meaningful way. So these $3,000 machines, what they allow you to do is allow you to get a business class variant of AI processing from the vendor directly, and that has all kinds of benefits. You might pay a little bit more for the cachet of having an Nvidia box, but at the same time, from a business perspective, that has a lot of weight in terms of you're buying it from the vendor, which means there's vendor support. You're also following that chain through. You're not getting the I don't know. I'm having a hard time coming up with like EVGA's spin on what makes up a video card. You're getting it directly referenced from the manufacturer, which is who you're going to buy the giant video cards for in your servers anyways. And so it's a production flow. On top of that, like this box is pretty darn good for the money in terms of the cost. Like $3,000 sounds like a lot, but it's not. It really isn't. When you're talking about buying a used card that is of decent quality for business use case for doing ML stuff, machine learning, you're talking $2,000 for a used one of decent quality. Like you can go lower, sure. But if you're talking about needing some of the fancy features, like for instance, there is the ability to split up your video card and give it to different processes. And I don't just mean I have a video card in a box and I throw a bunch of like FFmpeg and watch it fight for the GPU. I'm talking about literally carving up your GPU and shoving it in multiple VMs, very similar to SRIOV for network cards, where you can actually segment off these giant cards and split them up. These are the types of features that you're getting in business class that you can't do and can't experiment with and see what impact that might actually have. Like this little box, maybe you use 2 VMs and divide it between 2, but it still gives you an idea of what might be out there in terms of the stuff that you're going to encounter. Like the stuff that my clients use, they use that functionality, right? They buy these, $20, $30, $50,000 cards, and then they chop them up 5 ways from Sunday because that makes the most sense for them.
Sure. We'll have links for all of this in the show notes, as well as some of the things that people have thrown out in the chat room, like lmstudio.ai, an easy way to get started with AI. We're back next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central, AskNoahShow.com.